Do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign? Those were the first 8 words of the English language question for voters in that province in 1995. Millions of Quebecers cast their ballots in a referendum, and by the slimmest of margins, they rejected the idea of separation. Now, a new book has startling details about what was happening behind the scenes. Terence McKenna has more about what was going on leading up to the fateful vote and the morning after. A story so many of us were following so closely at the time. The country's future lies in the hands of one province tonight. 5 million Quebecers are choosing between yes and no, between Quebec and Canada.
October 30th, 1995 was a night of maximum tension. When the first results came in, the sovereignist side had a wide lead. It looked as if Parti Québécois leader Jacques Parizeau was about to realize his lifelong dream of separating Quebec from Canada. For Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, it looked as if the country was about to go over a cliff, and he had no real plan of what would happen next.
C'est l'option du non qui remportera ce référendum.
In the end, the Federalist side squeaked by in an extremely tight victory. One of the most fascinating and enduring questions of Canadian history is, what would have happened if the tight vote had gone the other way? In preparation for the 20th anniversary of the referendum next year, 2 of Quebec's leading journalists set out to ask that question to the key participants. Columnist Chantal Hebert appears in Actualité and the Toronto Star and on the National's At Issue panel. TVA political analyst Jean Lapierre was a longtime politician elected to Parliament both as a Liberal and a Bloc Québécois member. Their new book is called The Morning After.
Over the years, I've come to think that in Canada, we don't do well with our history in large part because the main players were allowed to go to their graves without having them testify. So what we wanted, I think, essentially was not to get definitive answers. We know we're never going to get those, but at least to put these people on the record so that Canadians who have not lived through this can look back and read this and have a bit of a sense of the flavor of the occasion.
What do you learn in the process?
Well, frankly, I couldn't believe what we learned because, you know, I thought, frankly, that both camps were organized. And then you realize that every day it's only inventing a strategy day by day. After having gone through this book, I realized that people were totally irresponsible. I mean, they played with the country, they played with us without a strategy on both sides.
Perhaps the central figure in the referendum story is Lucien Bouchard. Just before the campaign began, Bouchard had narrowly escaped death from an attack of flesh-eating disease that cost him his left leg. When he returned to the House of Commons in February 1995, he was given a hero's welcome from both sides of the aisle. The first new details in the book concern a secret meeting of Lucien Bouchard and Jacques Parizeau in March 1995. Bouchard drove from Ottawa to Montreal to try to convince the PQ leader to ask a very soft referendum question, much like the one asked by former Quebec Premier René Lévesque back in 1980, a question that would allow Quebecers a second chance to vote on whatever was the outcome of Quebec-Canada negotiations after a successful sovereignty vote. In the meeting at Parizeau's Montreal home, the PQ Premier refused Bouchard's request. Bouchard believes it was a historic mistake and told the authors the yes side would have won 55% or more with a softer question.
With that plan, we could have obtained a real mandate because Quebecers would have known that they would have the last word. The Quebec people would not have put themselves in the hands of 2 or 3 guys who would ultimately decide on its behalf.
First of all, do you think that he's right in his analysis that they would have got 55 or 60%?
It would have been much easier for them because then people would say, well, you know, I have another chance to make up my mind. But the fact that he wasn't running the show at all, he was just really being used as an orator.
Bouchard was really looking to improve Quebec's negotiating position, and it comes through the entire interview. Parizeau was minded on achieving independence at all costs.
The book catalogues the extreme acrimony behind the scenes on the sovereignist side, using threats to boycott the campaign. Bouchard eventually forced Parizeau to include in the referendum question a commitment to try and negotiate a new economic and political partnership with Canada before declaring sovereignty. Parizeau never believed such a deal would ever happen.
I don't want to be mean, but I frankly did not care much what they put in the partnership. Right from the beginning, I thought negotiations with Canada would almost certainly fail.
And I don't think, after having talked to Parizeau, he would not even have listened to Bouchard. I mean, he thought, I'm the boss, I'm running the show, and I think Bouchard would have been totally pushed out of the picture.
Adding the offer of a new Canada-Quebec partnership to the referendum question allowed Lucien Bouchard to convince Quebec's young third-party leader, Mario Dumont, to join the sovereignist campaign.
If I'd done something really stupid, I would have been stigmatized for it for a long time. But as long as Lucien was behind me, I told myself that I would be okay. If I aligned myself on his position, I would not come across as an extraterrestrial who was totally out of his depth.
They really saw eye to eye all the time, and frankly, Dumont thought that Lucien's instincts were the right ones, so he would just trust not even the speech or the strategy, just Lucien's instincts, because he knew that he could connect with Quebecers.
In fact, I don't think we're trading all that badly. On the contrary.
In the earliest days of the referendum campaign, things were going very badly for the sovereignist side.
Le négociateur en chef des Québécois, Monsieur Lucien Bouchard.
Until the moment that Jacques Parizeau announced that Lucien Bouchard would be Quebec's negotiator-in-chief after a yes vote, and Bouchard basically took over as leader of the sovereignist forces.
There never was a discussion as to my mandate. It happened very quickly in quasi-desperate circumstances over a matter of hours. I was told that I was negotiator-in-chief, and we used the title to get votes.
After having done this book, I've come to fairly harsh conclusions about the yes camp, and in particular Monsieur Bouchard's role in it, in the sense that people believed that Lucien Bouchard had their backs, but he didn't. He was just someone who had found a label to sell something for someone else. And I find that, frankly, irresponsible, and it is misleading advertising. I found Jacques Parizeau serious, and I found Lucien Bouchard not serious in this adventure.
When he took over as leader of the sovereignist forces, Bouchard was greeted as a messiah wherever he went in Quebec. People would reach out just to touch his clothing. Under his leadership, support for sovereignty surged.
And I think we're going to win it too.
On referendum day, with Jacques Parizeau confident of victory, the tensions in the sovereignist camp re-emerged. In the book, Lucien Bouchard reveals that he couldn't even get Parizeau to take his phone calls.
I could not talk with Mr. Parizeau or with people close to him. I simply could not get through to them. I sensed that all the compromises that had been arrived at to give me more space in the campaign were behind them. The message was that the Premier was back in charge. Was there really a role for me in the operation?
I was surprised that they would not talk, but on the other hand, I think for Mr. Parizeau, he had the polls telling him that he was winning. And he thought that was his day of glory, and he was in charge. So he was ready, and he would say, the day after, I am the Premier, and I'm running the show. And those guys, he said, you know, Bouchard could go back to Ottawa. He's leader of the opposition in Ottawa, bye-bye. And Dumont was a kid.
The Quebec people has just affirmed to the world.
On referendum day, Jacques Parizeau pre-recorded a TV address to his nation to be broadcast if the yes side won.
A strong and simple decision was made today. Quebec will become sovereign.
He taped his grand address without telling us. Until early in the evening, we had no sense from the Parizeau people how events would unfold after the yes had won. The Premier was incommunicado.
In the book, Jacques Parizeau admits that he was already plotting how to yank back control of events from the wildly popular Lucien Bouchard. If the sovereignist side won, Parizeau would insist on control of Bouchard's negotiating committee.
It was my prerogative to decide who would sit on Bouchard's negotiating committee, and I had no intention of sharing it. It would have essentially been people whom I trusted completely, drawn from the ranks of senior officials and from my own immediate entourage.
That he was the mastermind of everything.
Apparently, Lucien Bouchard knew none of this.
He would have been also in trouble because Parizeau would have had his guys all around him. I mean, he thought that he was going to be running the show. He found out in the papers later on that Parizeau had a whole team that was preparing the briefing books for the negotiation, and Lucien had never been contacted about it, consulted. He didn't even know that it existed.
Mario Dumont says he was conspiring with Bouchard to stop Parizeau from rushing to a unilateral declaration of independence.
We had had conversations about the fact that it could become necessary to stop Parizeau. Imagine that a week after the referendum, 2 of the 3 leaders who asked Quebecers for a mandate to negotiate sovereignty tell the world that the Premier does not see the way forward as we had imagined it.
To think that Lucien Bouchard, before a yes vote, was already thinking of ways to put sticks in the wheels of Jacques Parizeau, how solid can that be? How can that make sense? And how can that be a game plan that you turn against your own team to have it go your way after a yes vote? It's not a terribly disciplined approach to something that is very serious, and that would have had some fairly serious consequences.
Lucien Bouchard doubts that Parizeau could have been stopped, especially if Canada refused to negotiate after a yes vote.
Even I could not have stopped him. No one could have stopped Parizeau, and he would have been justified in doing it. As Premier, he had the power. He was the one who could present and pass legislation. He had a government and the legitimacy that comes with it. He could have terminated my services as chief negotiator.
On the Federalist side, the enduring question is what would have happened to Jacques Chrétien if the yes side had won. On the eve of the referendum, several federal cabinet ministers from English Canada met at this restaurant in Hull. They wondered aloud if Chrétien would have to resign. The former Prime Minister gave the authors his reaction.
Maybe among them were some who would want to be Prime Minister the next morning, but that's not how it works. I was a Francophone Prime Minister, but I held 98 of 99 Ontario seats. No one was more legitimate than I was.
The problem he would have had if he had lost the country because he had neglected the campaign, not campaigning well enough. I don't see how the rest of the country could have said, hey, we trust this guy to go at another time. And I think he would have been, well, in caucus. I mean, we know some ministers, some members would say, hey, we don't want him to talk and to speak on our behalf.
Et au cœur du peuple québécois.
What was most striking for the authors is that both Lucien Bouchard and Mario Dumont now suggest that what they really wanted was not sovereignty, but a new deal with the rest of Canada.
Let's strike a deal. They would have thought it through and said, let's strike a deal. But what that deal would have been, I don't know, except that it would certainly be better than what we have now.
The difference between me and Parizeau is that it was not that important for me to see a Quebec flag at the United Nations. I had not and did not want to give my life to the cause of sovereignty. It was not my ultimate goal.
20 years later, it's easy to say in this environment, these people look devious or they look like they're talking from both sides of their mouths. But there were always 2 kinds of people who were inclined to vote yes. There were those for whom it was a destination, that would be Jacques Parizeau, and there were those for whom it was a road to the destination of a different rapport de force between Quebec and Canada.
For the sovereignist forces, referendum night finished on a very sour note. The infamous speech in which Jacques Parizeau blamed money and the ethnic vote for his defeat.
Par l'argent puis des votes ethniques, essentiellement.
After that speech, I did not want to talk to anybody. I had the feeling of having done all that I had done, all that I had sacrificed, including part of my health, for nothing.
Yeah, he was very sour after that, because a lot of people, myself included, thought, I mean, this guy, you know, has no respect. He doesn't respect democracy, and he doesn't have any respect for a lot of our society. And I guess Lucien and company, who wanted to have a more inclusive society, thought this guy has just killed the movement for a long time.
The day after the referendum, Jacques Parizeau announced that he would resign as premier. Lucien Bouchard was quickly acclaimed as his replacement. Many thought Bouchard would speed Quebec into another referendum as soon as possible. He now says he never thought that.
I could not see another referendum taking place quickly. I felt that there was a lot of fatigue, that we had given it all that we could, and that we had exhausted ourselves. We were missing only an inch, but that was all the ground that there was to be had. I could not see us doing it again anytime soon.
So after all the interviews you've done, if the vote was yes, would Quebec have separated?
My feeling is that it would have gone through hell, because Parizeau would have wanted to go fast, and then I think a lot of Quebecers would have changed their mind. You know, all the polls would have said, no, it's not 51%, it's now down to 40% or 38%.
So I guess you're saying no.
At the end, I'm saying no. I think the difference between 38 and 51%, those people would have changed their mind like rapidly.
There would have been people outside Quebec who would have said, okay, they voted yes, let's do this. And they would have spoken for, you know, a number of sad, maybe broken-hearted Canadians, but at some point, yeah, I think there were enough elements to believe that a yes would have resulted in separation.
Lucien Bouchard said he would have another referendum if the winning conditions for one appeared. They never did, and so he resigned as premier in 2001. Jacques Parizeau told one interviewer that Bouchard had the reflexes of a loser and that he would never have resigned as premier if he knew his successor was so reluctant to press for another referendum. The Hebert Lapierre book is the latest salvo in this historic feud, a battle that is likely not over yet. For The National, I'm Terence McKenna in Montreal.